Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. The year 2020 is well underway, having served as a marker or determination point for most development programs for different administrations in Nigeria since the turn of the century. Vision 2020 is one that readily comes to mind as a popular socio-economic blueprint in the days of the Obasanjo and Yar'Adua administrations. However, with the 21st century hitting the third decade mark, to what extent could it be said that the lives of Nigerians have been improved as a result of these programs? And what must the government of President Muhammadu Buhari do differently in order to make more positive impacts in this direction? For a greater focus on this, we're now being joined by Professor Pat Utomi, a teacher of political economy and management expert. Professor Utomi, who was a personal advisor to Nigeria's Second Republic President, the late Alhaji Shehu Shagari, is currently the founder of Center for Value in Leadership and the African Democratic Congress. Welcome to the program, sir. Good morning.
Good morning, sir. Welcome to the program.
Good morning.
Prof, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you.
Yes. Well, I was surprised when I saw your name associated with the Never Again conference. Well, I mean, Never Again, that sounds very familiar. You once wrote an essay of the same title. And yesterday we had Father George Usani here also, and he too was talking about Never Again. And I said, I mean, Nigerians were talking about Never Again after the end of the Civil War in 1970. Yeah. After the military annulled the June 12 election, there was also a Never Again progress. And now again, 20 years after, or more, we're again talking about Never Again. 50 years after Civil War, when are we going to get this new Nigeria? And what do you think is the problem? That we're always talking about, we're looking for a new Nigeria, we're looking for a new Nigeria. Other countries 50 years ago are at a different level today, but we seem not to have made any progress.
It's a bit of a shame, but human beings make progress in different ways. The recurring of the theme, Never Again, shows that Nigerians do really want to move away from the external order. However, it seems that the nature of the forces that are pulling our country haven't caught on to the fact that Nigerians are tired of the way we live. Current modus vivendi is unacceptable to the Nigerian people. They want something different. I think that is really the true test of our political culture, that people finally say public life must be about changing something that Nigerians say we don't want to see again. And the Civil War is a pretty good example. There are many things that came out of the war. War is a horrible thing. I think only people who have not experienced war can glamorize war. In any form, shape, any approach you take to it, war is a horrible thing. And people go through that experience, and they're supposed to draw lessons from the experience. And it becomes really a source of strength moving on. If you look at what has happened to many countries that were actually defeated in war, they came out so much stronger. Germany came out of World War II, and within years, with the Adenauer leadership, was the strongest economy in Europe, was the dominant. I mean, Europe is France and Germany. I mean, everything else is decoration. Japan came out of World War II completely shattered. In fact, the famous Harvard economist, who was a Japan expert, gave countries like Nigeria that were still colonized a greater chance of becoming really prosperous than Japan. And we know what happened. It was soon the second biggest economy in the world. So why have we not been able to learn from our own experiences? These things need to be interrogated deeply. Otherwise, we'll just keep making the same mistakes and going around in circles. I have my world of theories about many of these things. But if we have a public space that is rational, because one of the biggest challenges we have in Nigeria is that we don't have a rational public space where conversations take place. You say, oh, Ruben Abati, he used to chain smoke on the street. I mean, just say anything to say that, but don't address the issue. And because we're not doing that, we're not learning from our experiences that have not been exactly what they should be. And we're repeating every day mistakes we made before. The Civil War was a completely unnecessary war, in my opinion. Everybody has their opinion. So many terrible things led up to it. And amongst the terrible things that led up to it, we are seeing repeated today. Nature of public conversation. If you read newspapers in 1966, 67, my goodness, horrible. But it's not half as bad as what is flying on the internet today. So how do we overcome that mindset? We talk intelligently about it, and people can get formed in terms of what's important about the nature of public conversation. The things that we settle violently can be settled from really intelligent conversation. And the violence destroys everything that you have built up to that point. And so it's important to say never again. The one you referred to, the last one, the piece that I wrote in 1993, Never Again, which led to the founding of the Concerned Professionals and the fight against military rule. We've come to a point where people are as angry with civilian rule today in Nigeria as they were with military rule. People want this thing to end. Why should that be the case? We must ask ourselves, how do we ensure that governance responds every day to the passion, the feelings, the pains of the people on the streets of this country? That way they own the country, they own the problems, and they help bring solution to it. That's what our democracy must produce.
You've raised so many issues, I don't even know where to start. But as a basis, we'd learn a lot more from our mistakes if we were not so busy denying them.
Absolutely.
You have said very clearly and correctly that there's just such a lack of rational discourse. There's a lot of emotive discourse, there's a lot of outbursts, there's a lot of recrimination, but no real intelligence being applied to these issues. So what is it that your ultimate aim for the Never Again conference is?
It's to point to some of the things that we must draw from the experience of the Civil War. There were very good things, there were horrible things. For example, we live in denial about it, but the Nigerian Civil War was the second most horrible genocide of the 20th century. The word genocide was actually invented in the 20th century, it didn't exist, in treating the Armenian experience in Turkey and all of that. That's how the word genocide was coined. But that genocide doesn't even begin to approach what the Nigerian Civil War was. And we completely pretend it didn't happen. I had a very peculiar Civil War experience because I saw the Civil War from 3 different angles. I'm sure there are not too many people who did that, who had that privilege. I was in Biafra when the war started. I was at Christ the King's College in Onitsha. At some point, I crossed the Niger in the canoe at night and was in the other theater, the Midwest, the liberated Midwest, where there was massive killing still going on. In Asaba, we faced what could probably be the worst case, except in the Holocaust with Jews in Germany, of that kind of massacre. Within a few weeks of the Asaba massacre, for young people who don't know the story, federal troops moved into Asaba, and the people of Asaba got together to welcome federal troops warmly, wore their finest, came out to celebrate the liberation, and they were told, okay, men line up this way, women line up this way, and just open, cold-blooded murder of hundreds and thousands of men. I barely escaped that first round, but I was in that situation myself a few weeks later when I had crossed from Biafra into the Midwest side and were quote-unquote captured. And again, men this way, women this way. But another group of federal soldiers then chanced upon what was going on and began to challenge the group that were quote-unquote captured, and they started fighting. While they were fighting, the, I guess, battalion commander or somebody, Lieutenant Colonel Nathaniel Nasamu, arrived. Just by coincidence, Lieutenant Colonel Nasamu was my father's friend. Anyhow, I ended up in a refugee camp, and a few weeks later, I was in Lagos, and I went back to school in Ibadan. See, while we were in Lagos, the Civil War was some funny thing happening somewhere. I mean, we're having serious parties with James Brown on top of matters, you know. There was a ban on importation of things like music. So you were a happening guy if you were seen with an album of Papa's Got a Brand New Bag or something. So we're having that kind of fun. We didn't even know there was, from time to time, we saw on TV, go on with one Nigeria, you know, all the kind of propaganda stuff outside of it. And every time I see people in Lagos react to the Boko Haram thing, I just get that deja vu. Oh, there's some funny part of Nigeria in the northeast. They're just killing each other. These funny people. That's the same way that people saw the Civil War while it was going on. So these three different perspectives on the war, I think, gives me, if you will, something that I can share with young people to understand what it really means to have human solidarity and to say this kind of thing should never happen again. If you see images from Biafra, they were so horrible that nobody should want to see that again. But we don't teach history, so young people don't know this happened. They will very quickly walk into it and experience it again if we don't enlighten them about what the public sphere really is.
You're absolutely right, because this is this country's history, and at the end of the day, history shouldn't repeat itself of this kind. No one wants a situation like that. And what's worrying is we look at Nigeria today, we're in the year 2020, and like we stated at the start of this conversation that we're having today, there are even two past presidents that led a whole 2020 campaign, Vision 2020 for Nigeria, and some of the targets were as follows. For example, Nigeria was to be in the top 20 economies in the world. We're 27th. Nigeria was also supposed to completely diversify from oil. We're still 75% dependent on oil. Nigeria was supposed to lift at least 50% of its citizens out of poverty. Today, we're the poverty capital of the world with over 100 million citizens in poverty. So clearly, we've missed all of our targets. So my question is then, what is the way forward?
Well, first, the state is disconnected from society. I mean, people who run Nigeria don't even know what's going on in Nigeria. That is the naked truth. They won't admit it to themselves, but that's the truth. Two, there is an over-politicization of Nigeria, and everything's about naked raw power. I was talking to a friend of mine who was a very senior intelligence officer for many, many years, and he said he's never known Nigeria to be so consumed by money and power as it is today. So the elite in Nigeria are just obsessed with how much power they can get and how much money they can make off of the power. They're not connected to Nigerian people. And that is dangerous for any society. We must begin a process of making power accountable for every kobo and its use to uplift the Nigerian. I don't know where culture collapsed, but I know there's a collapse of culture in Nigeria. But the frame of the African mindset, even if you take away the development thinking that the world is trying to get everybody to get into, is Ubuntu. I am because we are. People seem to be so comfortable being in this strange way of having funny houses in Dubai, London, that they probably don't spend 3-4 days in a year in, and all around them is this horrible poverty. That disconnect is perhaps more than anything, in my view, responsible for Nigeria not ever being able to go towards its goals. There isn't the passion. I don't know. One of the things I say is the loss of a sense of shame in Nigeria. If I were a leader in Nigeria, I'd be walking around with my head like this. Because I show up somewhere and say, his country, look at the poverty in the place. I won't be able to sleep. But somehow it doesn't matter to those who run Nigeria. I don't know how we got there to have people so insensitive about the reality around them. But that's what we have, unfortunately, today. And learning from history should help us overcome that kind of numbness, that kind of lack of sensitivity to the plight of the ordinary person.
Prof, it's been 50 years since the Civil War, and there are some people who hold the view that the Civil War is not yet over. And in their reckoning, the Civil War will be deemed to have truly ended when one day an able man becomes president of Nigeria. Now, this Never Again conference around the Civil War and the challenges of progress in Nigeria, or the opposite, is it going to also talk about 2023 and the possibility of Igbo presidency? And do you agree, one way or the other, about the Civil War being over or not?
First of all, I disagree with all of what you have stated. They're useful things to talk about, but they're not that. I do agree that, first of all, we began making quite a bit of progress immediately after the Civil War itself. I think that, for however you perceive it, the leadership of General Gowon at the end of the Civil War was fantastic. the effort, the whole idea of no victor, no vanquish, and all of that was worth the celebration that he did get. Maybe we didn't get enough real mileage. But this went to the next level when President Shehu Shagari picked Dr. Alex Ekwueme as his running mate. In fact, the biggest challenge we have is that certain elements deliberately carried out the coup of 1983 to prevent Alex Ekwueme from becoming president in 1987. Had Ekwueme become president in 1987, the ghost of Biafra would have been completely buried. But they did stop it. Now, having had that happen, the gains made with Gowon's approach and Shagari's disposition were lost in many ways. But I do not think that the problems of Nigeria will be solved by an Igbo man being called president. Because it is likely that he will look for one useless Igbo man who will...
So there are some useless Igbo men.
Who will just sit there?
No problem. You say there are some
useless people from everywhere. Useless Yoruba people, useless FX, useless... You know, and the man will sit there and spend 4 years or 8 years or whatever, and we don't make any progress. What is important is creating a structure of society, a socio-political mood of organizing our society that emphasizes the principle of subsidiarity and pushes power to the levels closest to the people. I personally prefer a return to the British-style parliamentary system where peers can then pick somebody they know amongst themselves is more capable. The logic of the presidential system was that everybody will own the president because he's voted for around the country. Tell me how many people who have been president have been owned by Nigerians? They are always accused of pursuing one kind of agenda or the other. So that logic has not played out. So why not have a prime minister that can be more properly elected by peers and can then, you know, allow local administrations to drive. Let me give you a simple example. You know, my mantra is Nigeria must produce or die. Challenge of Nigeria doesn't produce. Nigeria just shares. Now, if you consider the fact that in the old order before the military came in, the production was driven from bottom up. The regions were the ones who were competing for who would most bring progress to their people. In fact, two Americans, Howard Wolpe and Robert Melson, in their book on development and the modernization in Nigeria, talk about the spirit of competitive communalism, competing ethnic nationality groups on who would most bring progress to their people. That was what led to the kind of industrialization that allowed Michael Okpara as premier to boast in '64 that Eastern region was the fastest growing economy in the world. If you can debate the basis of that claim. But, you know, the industrialization of the Southwest, the response to the Southeast, Sardauna's response with Kakuri, all of those things made Nigeria make progress. Once the military centralized authority, it just became a matter of who can beg enough the big man, the center, the general, to give to the poor colonel in the state something, the so-called prebendal approach. And so everybody went to the vicar for their prebend. And Nigeria stopped producing. Everybody is trying to get their share, doesn't produce anymore. So a form of government that takes power close to the people will pressure the people to get the right kinds of people elected to work towards their well-being. Right now, it's not happening.
So are you in agreement with calls for a sovereign national conference being mooted by Are Afe Babalola, who is saying that we mustn't go into the 2023 elections with this constitution, and calling not even for an amendment but a total replacement and taking it out of the hands of legislators?
I agree completely with his call, but what I don't know is whether the word sovereign to the conference, because Africa went through that phase, and they played games around it. In Zaire, that became Congo DRC, in even Benin, next door, went through all of these sovereign national conferences. But yes, this constitution is not working. I can tell you for free. The current Nigerian constitution does not work. It impoverishes Nigeria. It creates an elite. We talk about useless people. It creates a useless elite that just wants to go to Dubai. Look, last week I was trying to call. Nobody was in town. Everybody was in Dubai. I'm telling you.
Minimal traffic's on the streets this week.
Yeah.
People are still away.
They're still in Dubai and London and New York. What kind of country that produces nothing? Yeah, can afford to go. But when you look at it, there are a couple of 100 or 1,000 of them spending that kind of amount of money, and the rest of us are here. So something's wrong with that structure. It's not sustainable. It can only lead to a revolution.
Dubai, why not?
So she's one of them. Okay.
I want to put you on the spot.
What I wanted to ask you is, you said that you propose a return to the British parliamentary system. How likely do you think a change in our political system actually is?
That is the people who are supposed to change it are the problem. So either we tell them that we are not satisfied with what's going on,
which we've been doing.
1 million of us can stand in front of National Assembly every day and say, we don't want this system anymore. If we do that for 3 weeks, they will pack their load. And, you know, this is serious. The world knows we're not working. The world is laughing at us. But we are still held hostage by a few people that we claim to elect. This is a coup d'etat.
Which is why Arab Babalola says we have to take it out of the hands of legislators.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, they will never.
It will never happen.
It suits them.
Yes, it suits them.
But Prof, President Buhari, President of Nigeria today, on January 1, was just talking about leaving a legacy. And he tried to define that legacy along the lines of the highlights of his administration. And he added a new one, which is electoral integrity and ensuring that there's transparency and accountability in our electoral process. Is there really a role that the present administration can play in achieving this objective of transformation? And do you believe the president when he says, you know, he's committed to this never again principle and moving Nigeria forward?
See, history teaches us not to rule anything out. But there is enough information to suggest that our current situation was built on lack of elections. But it is possible that people who came out of no elections can seek to have integrity in elections. I'll tell you one of my favorite examples. As Allied forces were invading Europe, you know, landing in Normandy and all of that, Hitler saw the advance and wanted Paris razed to the ground, destroyed completely. That was going to be. And he gave the order that the German general in control of Paris, commander in Paris, should burn down the city. And von Collitz, who was the general, wore his full uniform, went in front of a mirror and looked at himself and said, how will history remember that I burned down the most beautiful city in the world? And decided he was not going to do it. They sent a message to the Allied forces to come in and take Paris. They thought it was a trick, so they ignored him. He sent again. When Hitler realized that this was going on, he dispatched an SS Panzer's division to start moving towards Paris. And in the, desperation of the moment, von Collitz was sending a message to Allied, and a ragtag group of Free French forces, ignoring Eisenhower's command, led by Charles de Gaulle, just drove into Paris, and there was no resistance. That's how Paris was saved in World War II. Anything is possible in history. But the history of the current order is not one of integrity in elections. So it gives you reason to worry, but you should not give up, because history is full of all kinds of surprises.
Well, all it takes is one person with a conscience. But okay, talking about Nazis, they had their Nuremberg trial. In the South African context, they had their Truth and Reconciliation Committee. Rwanda had theirs. Even in Nigeria, we couldn't seamlessly segue from military to civilian rule. We had to have a Oputa panel. Why was nothing similar done regarding the Biafra War, because you said something really tragic earlier that many young people don't know about the Asaba massacre, and that's the truth. People don't know. Today, we even celebrate war criminals. People just don't know the facts. Why did that never happen?
People were given £20
Well,
for their losses.
Imagine.
Well, there are many things that if you go into, will tell you how horrible that experience was. But, something that I ask myself is, why did someone like me? My grandfather was used for target practice. As the troops moved in, people from my hometown all ran into the bush. They were living in the bush for like 1 year or so. My grandfather, World War II veteran, did think, oh, what the hell? So he stayed in his house. And one young soldier saw him in front of his house and said, old man, what are you doing there? And he said, why should I not be? This is my house. The young man just brought out his gun. Somebody was watching from somewhere and just shot my grandfather for target practice. Question is, why did I never get angry? And this, in 1987, January of 1997, I was spending a year of sabbatical in the US, and I'd committed a good part of that year to canvassing for the idea of an international criminal court to try leaders, and I was pointedly aiming at African leaders, for economic crimes against their people. Mainly, I was driven more by economic crimes, and then, of course, for genocide. But for some reason, I never thought of Biafra. I never thought of my own personal experience. It didn't seem to. What was driving me, because at that time I was writing a book, Managing Uncertainty in Competition and Strategy in Emerging Economies. And I kept looking at the environment of business. Africa was not making progress because government was the biggest danger to progress in Africa. And if you see the framework that I call the 3E framework, the Emerging Economies Environment Framework, the biggest problem was what I call predatory acts of public officials. So how do you create institutions that essentially hold off the predatory acts of government officials so that economies can thrive? And because of that, I thought we needed supranational institutions. And I began a campaign around. So one morning in January 1997, I went to meet with the editorial board of the Christian Science Monitor in Boston to make a presentation to encourage this idea of an international criminal court. Of course, when I finished, they said I was too idealistic. It would not happen. Amazingly, less than 2 years later, the Statute of Rome was passed.
Well, unfortunately, we'll have to close the conversation at this point. We wish we could go on, for the rest of the program. Yes. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, sir.
Great pleasure. I'm glad I could.